Good afternoon, and welcome to the Faculty Diversity Research and Curriculum Development and LGBTQ Research Initiative Grant. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Komala Shahani Denning, Senior Vice Provost for Academic Affairs. Today we are pleased to showcase faculty research and creative work that advances inclusive excellence, deepens our understanding of diverse lived experiences, and connects scholarship to meaningful change. Our first speaker is Dr. Fabián Arroyo Rojas from the School of Education, whose project titled Disabled Students' Experience in Kinesiology-Based Programs in Higher Education in the United States examines how disabled students navigate kinesiology programs and what these experiences reveal about access, equity, and well-being. Our second speaker, Dr. Lisa Merrill from Hofstra College Liberal Arts and Sciences, whose project titled Sounding Anti-Slavery Voices, Black Women on the Speaker's Platform, explores the powerful performance traditions and rhetorical impact of 19th century Black women elocutionists and activists. And our third speaker is Professor Ashish Kumar from the Harvard School of Communication, whose project titled Colors That Move, How LGBTQ family acceptance films from immigrant communities create radical empathy, highlights how storytelling around sexual and gender diversity within immigrant communities can foster understanding, connection, and social transformation. Together, these three projects reflect the purpose of these grant programs: to support innovative interdisciplinary work that challenges assumptions, amplifies marginalized voices, and helps build more equitable and inclusive learning environments. To ensure that all three speakers have enough time, we're going to have 2 questions per speaker after each presentation, and then hopefully we have enough time at the end to open it up to a broader discussion. But please welcome our first speaker, Dr. Fabián Arroyo Rojas.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here today. For those that love summertime, please rest assured that summer is coming, just not today. It's quite a pleasure to be here. My name is Fabián Arroyo Rojas. I'm an assistant professor in health and physical education in the School of Education. One of the things that I want to clarify first is that you will see that my terminology throughout the presentation refers to disabled people as opposed to people with disabilities. I largely stand with critical disability studies, where I view disability as an integral part of a human being rather than something that people have or they can put on or put off at the end of the day. So you will see my terminology being disabled people throughout my entire presentation. So with that in mind, one of the things that I really wanted to clarify first is to tell you what the study is not about, rather than telling you exactly what the study is about. So 2 things to keep in mind. I do not want you to feel at the end of this presentation that first that having a disability or being disabled sucks. I don't want you to feel that way. The second thing here is you should not lower your expectations in regards to disabled people. This is not about that. This is maintaining high expectations with all people, including disabled people. And the second thing, or the third thing, in fact, that I want to mention here is I do not want to encourage inspiration about what disabled people can do. That's not the message in this presentation whatsoever. So let me tell you what I did. I wanted to firmly explore the experiences of disabled students in kinesiology-based programs in higher education in the United States. You might be wondering what kinesiology is. Well, kinesiology is highly interested in the body and the movement generated by that body. And with that in mind, one of the things that we actually know, and it's been criticized, that most of what we know about the body and the movement generated by the body, it comes primarily from non-disabled perspectives. So with that in mind, it was for me very important to know how these people, disabled people, experience those programs and how their identities come forward and how those experiences are like within those programs. Another thing is disabled people's voices, generally speaking across research, they've been largely absent from research. Although they've been coming forward more and more so in the last decade or so, particularly from critical disability studies and from Nothing About Us Without Us movements, we still feel that there is a high need in terms of listening and hearing about the experiences of disabled people across different spaces. So one of the things that I wanted to do here is, my study was theoretically grounded in critical ableism framework. And basically what it does, or what it is, if I can summarize this, is that ableism it's a system of network and beliefs that actually non-disabled people have a higher social value within society in respect to disabled people. So anything that non-disabled people do, or they can actually say, or those behaviors that come from non-disabled people, they will typically have naturally, and many times naturally, a higher value than those things that disabled people can actually do. So obviously there is a privilege of non-disabled people across the discourse, across different spaces, including kinesiology. Ableism can manifest in different ways through direct, indirect, structural, and internalized behaviors. Direct is basically saying that you directly and voluntarily think that non-disabled people are an inconvenience to society. Indirect is many times that we have messages that we don't think through about, but they send a message that non-disabled people are inferior. For example, in movement spaces, people say you should stand more and sit less. What do we do about people that are in wheelchairs? So those kind of messages are indirect messages about their social value in society. Structure is about all the structures that we have in place in higher education institutions, for example, and how these centers kind of support or not disabled people. And internalize, it's the behaviors that disabled people have gained by being in society and saying, I need to work really, really hard to become more valued by others in society, including non-disabled people as well. So this is what I did. My research design was an experiential qualitative approach, and what it does is it centers the insider to inform their experience. Rather than ask teachers, faculty, or non-disabled people, what I wanted to do is ask disabled people themselves what your experiences are like within these spaces. So that's what an experiential qualitative approach does. Let me give you a little bit of context. So the participants, they're all participating in kinesiology programs. And kinesiology is a broad field, and it has subdisciplines. Some of these subdisciplines are exercise science, physical therapy, occupational therapy, physical education. So all these participants came from different places and different programs. One of the things that I asked is they needed to have at least one semester completed within an undergraduate or a graduate program. And then I'll give you an example of the participants in just a second. And the last thing here is, for me, what's important. Rather than use a framework such as IDEA or ADA to frame who does or does not have a disability, I decided to ask them if they could self-report with a disability. If they identify as disabled, then that criteria was met within my study. So this is I'm reporting, this is a little bit small right now. I understand this is quite not accessible at the moment for everybody, and I do apologize for this. There are 10 participants. The data that I'm going to be reporting on you today is going to be based on 10 participants across different places. You can see that they come from different parts of the United States, from the Midwest, East Coast, and also we have a couple from the West Coast. One of the things that you will notice, and although I'm not using an intersectional lens here, is that most of the participants are actually white. So I have less reporting on people of color and disabled people at the same time. So that is one thing that I do want to highlight here. And you will see that there isn't a range of disabilities that they actually self-reported in this study. So this is what I did, and I think I'm very excited to report on this. I actually interviewed them twice, and the first interview was more so a structure with a critical ableism lens in mind, but one of the things that I wanted to know more about was about their interactions with faculty, their interactions with peers, and their interactions, broadly speaking, in their program. So then I did a preliminary analysis on those first round of interviews. And then what I did is I actually went back to the participants for a second interview. And what I did is I presented this preliminary analysis. And what I wanted to encourage, because my study was interpretative in nature, I wanted them to reflect on those experiences that were reported from other people. So I grabbed quotes from other participants, and I presented these quotes to these other participants. And I wanted them to reflect and see if those relate or not in terms of their own experiences. I also use researchers' reflective notes, and I have noticed that many times this is just reported as a checklist on research, but I really use notes to be able to capture thematic elements of interest to my research question in particular. And as you can see, obviously, I utilize this thematic analysis in order to do that, and I'm hoping this aligns with my research approach and obviously with my epistemological and ontological assumptions within the interpretative paradigm. So I'm going to present to you 4 interrelated themes. And then I'm going to discuss and present some quotes to you. And then I'll provide you with some points of discussion that I thought it was relevant. The first theme is, he said I should drop the class if I couldn't handle the workload, instructional barriers. Number 2, they actually listen and work with me, finding support. It felt like bodies were problems to fix, navigating ableist pedagogies and the normalization of the ideal body. I basically redo the class for myself, engaging in self-adaptive strategies to succeed. He said I should drop the class if I couldn't handle the workload. So one of the things that Bella in my study mentioned, she said the instructor basically said he didn't believe what I said it happened. I couldn't concentrate on the test. Then he limited my exams to 1 question at a time and monitored me while I took the test. He said I should drop the class if I couldn't handle the workload. If you're a faculty member, and this is probably something that I was learning myself a lot throughout this study as well, is how many times, whether intentionally or not, we are putting the students in spots where they are forced to do certain things that they're not able to do, or they just need extra time to do certain things. We should not be discriminating students and telling them what to do or not to do if we are not providing at least with reasonable accommodations. But at the same time, the fact that we are monitoring them or extra monitoring them, it can become a little bit quite problematic. I'm going to summarize the second one so I can move along. This student was taking a test, a practical test, and because he experienced dyslexia, he wasn't able to write down the words that the instructor was expecting him to do. So that became a problem. And then the instructor finally was able to give in and give them the option to be more flexible, and the instructor will write down the words for him, but he was able to demonstrate his knowledge in terms of what bones and where the bones were located, what the bones did in those cases. So he's able to demonstrate his knowledge in other ways. But my major point here is that instructors are lacking some flexibility. And obviously I'm speaking to myself here as an instructor as well. It felt like bodies were a problem to fix. One of the things that the participants expressed is that many times disability and disabled bodies within this kinesiology programs, despite of what program this was, disability was portrayed as something negative, something to fix. And even when they were speaking about disability or other disabled people, themselves, my participants or their participants fell in a very point of contention within those classes when they were speaking about disability. So let me read about Bella's quote here. So there is this fixed mentality. Our program's aim is to make people perform better. Sometimes it felt empowering, but sometimes it felt uncomfortable, like we were treating bodies as problems. It felt like disabled bodies were problems to fix. On a more supportive and a more positive note, the third theme here that I constructed was, we'll figure out as things come up. I'm here to support you, finding support. So the graduate advisor, told me, we'll figure it out as things come up. I'm here to support you. It was the first time someone didn't make me feel like a burden. Although I'm using some quotes here from Bella because she was very reflective at the time she spoke with me, and I really appreciated that time from her. But Lawrence also said instructors say blind people can run on a treadmill, that it was unsafe, so they couldn't be included in the study. it erased any possibility of adaptation. So finding support, and sometimes the support that is needed, sometimes it's not displayed explicitly by instructors, and sometimes, again, the disability component is placed as a negative connotation within the classes and within those programs. Lastly, I basically redo the class for myself. So I'm engaging in self-adaptive strategies to succeed. So I will just read a quote here from Layla. So they are finding many times support themselves, and they're navigating the spaces to understand and make sense of the content themselves, rather than getting that support from universities in this case. She said, I record every lecture and listen with the slides at home. I basically redo the class for myself, sometimes 3 times. So one of the things that I highlighted to them, and many times they felt, and that was the case for them as well, is that beyond being in the lecture place and beyond being in the study time after class, sometimes they felt that they were excessively going and beyond to trying to make sense of the content and trying to understand of the content because it wasn't fully accessible in many ways. Let me provide you with some discussion points. Similar to discussions that have taken place in K through 12 settings, one of the things that becomes very problematic is that the integration of disabled people into spaces has also become a problem, in a sense that people don't feel included within those spaces, despite of being physically present in those spaces. Although they are in kinesiology programs, many times the practices that they continue to experience remain unchanged. So with that in mind, the pedagogical practices offered by instructors many times lead to the students themselves finding constantly self-adaptive strategies to be able to perform or to be able to demonstrate their knowledge within those courses. Another thing that became also problematic, and I do want to highlight, is the body, more than a sociological space to deconstruct, it was many times perceived or constructed from a medicalized view, only from body, bones, and muscles, and flesh. But many times we don't discuss what the body is in presence of a social space with non-disabled people, or what about in spaces where they are enabled to perform as non-disabled people. With that in mind, many times students feel that their experiences as disabled people were diminished about their own bodies, so they felt their bodies had less social value within those spaces. With that in mind, disability continues to be displayed as a negative connotation, in meaning that disability is something negative, it's something that you have, and it's not discussed as an integral part of your body or part of your life. And one more thing here that I do want to highlight is that for me, it's very important to continue to include the experiences of disabled people, despite of the context of the social space that we are in. Those experiences can really inform what our practices are and what kind of accommodations we are doing for them or not. In other words, it's very important that the decisions that we make are largely informed by disabled people, and we should not be making those decisions as not disabled people for them at all times. So, despite the development of clear procedures and policies to provide accommodations or to bring people into the spaces, there is a lot of resistance from instructors. There is a lot of things and practices that remain unchanged, which is still a challenge. And many times, while kinesiology is highly considering the body and the well-being of bodies across society, we also find that there is a contradictory message within those kinesiology programs where they might not be fully engaged or keeping the well-being of disabled people in mind. Perhaps there is an indirect message about disabled people not being valued within those kinesiology programs. I hope you enjoyed that presentation. I really thank you for your time hearing this presentation here. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. That was really great. I've done this type of research myself, so it really resonates with me. The 4 themes that you talked about definitely resonated as well as a professor that wants to be inclusive. I'm thinking about what you said at the end about I forgot the exact word you said, but just like almost like not the hypocrisy, but the tension of working in a kinesiology program, thinking about bodies, but then some students, particularly maybe those with a physical disability, kind of not speaking to them. Did you get any sense, or did you hear from your participants any sort of feelings of like, it feels particularly rough hearing these things from my kinesiology professors in a way that they might, from their chemistry professors, psychology professors, might think like, well, they're not as thinking about bodies. Like, it feels more wrong of you to say this to me.
Yeah. So the short answer is yes. They felt highly uncomfortable many times, especially when it came to, fighting for their accommodations and fighting for ways that they can feel supported. Many times, and in some cases, not many times, in some cases, some of the participants felt that it was much better to not disclose their disability and not find support because they didn't want to be perceived as less people in comparison to the other students. So disability is still, it's in discussions, and we still are in a long way to consider as part of a person's life. And I think from the instructor's perspective, I think disability-specific training, considering different models of disability, I think it's important when it comes to supporting disabled people, despite of the program they are in, whether that's kinesiology or not. But I think that's an important aspect that we haven't done enough, in my view.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Mine isn't a question, but it's more sort of something that was going through my mind, which is when you were giving the example of the student with dyslexia and the instructor saying, okay, point to the bone, that it really made me think that the problem really isn't the disability, the problem is our assessment method. Because if we should be assessing what this student is going to need to know when they're actually at work.
Yeah.
So, and that, if you change the assessment method, it's going to help maybe the students with a disability, but it's going to help all students because you're thinking about application to what they really need to know and how they need to demonstrate their behavior.
I would say this in line with the previous question is, this is why it's so important that we understand disability from different perspectives. And that speaks about the social model of disability, in which the problem is not the person themselves, nor their disability or their impairment themselves. It's more so about the structures that are around that person and how we adjust to those and meet the needs of the students. So, and it continues to be a student-centered, but identifying disability as an integral component and adjusting to those so the students can be successful as well. So thank you for that comment. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for finding your way here on this still snowy day. So it's nice to see friends and to see new people. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Lisa Merrill, and I'm a performance historian. So that means most of the time I live in the 19th century. I prowl through archives and encourage students to prowl with me to find things that have been hidden or not acknowledged before. And today I'll be talking to you briefly about this new project, Sounding Anti-Slavery Voices, where I'm looking at the experience of Black women on the speaker's platform in the 19th century. And so just in terms of this diversity grant, I'm looking particularly at the performance practices and reception of the dramatic readings of two women particularly. One that you'll hear, Mary Webb, who is the solo performer for whom Harriet Beecher Stowe rewrote Uncle Tom's Cabin to have that novel understood only through the voice and body of a Black woman. So it's a completely different experience to reading the novel, and you'll hear why shortly. And the second woman that I'm going to be talking about is actress and activist Henrietta Vinton Davis. And Davis was someone who started out as an actor and became an incredible activist with Marcus Garvey as part of the UNIA. So you'll hear how the role of performance and dramatic reading was a way to instill this activism. So let me give you a sense first of Mary Webb. In doing this research, I know I have colleagues and friends in the School of Communication, and much of my work means diving through 19th century newspapers. So you'll see some of the clippings there, and this is from The Liberator, where Mary Webb has been described in one of her first performances. She was living in Philadelphia with her husband, who wrote the second published novel, second black person to publish a novel from the United States. And she was born in 1828, but in 1855, after her husband's business failed, Mary Webb, who had been studying with an elocutionist, and this is somebody who teaches public speaking and performance, decided to do this professionally, to go on the stage and demonstrate to people what she understood about language, about literature, and have solo performers. So the clip you see there is shortly after she first performed. She first performed on April 19th, 1855 in Philadelphia before an audience that was larger than professional critics had ever seen. And she advertised herself under the title of the Black Sit-ins. Now, again, this may sound strange to people. Sarah Siddons was the most famous white actress in the early 19th century. So by equating herself in that way, she was announcing to people both her embracing her blackness and also the theatricality of her work. But a lot of people took issue on the title there. So the clip that you see there is some of the first reactions for audiences to see this black woman doing pieces of Shakespeare, seeing her perform poetry. And remember, this is a time, 1855, a time of enslavement in the US, although she's in the North, where enslaved people don't even have the right to literacy. And here we have this remarkable woman performing and filling audiences. In the past couple of weeks, so this research is very timely, I've been looking particularly not only at The Liberator, but at Frederick Douglass's newspaper. Those of you who've been to my office know there's a giant poster of Frederick Douglass on the wall, the most important public speaker and writer of the 19th century. And in the first two months of Webb's performance, Frederick Douglass repeated 5 different days of accounts of Webb's performances all over. So that's pretty significant that he chose to do that. Other newspapers covered her as well, like The Liberator, but I've been working with a Douglass biographer and located those most recently. Now, Douglass said, not in this review, but in others, that the title, The Black Sit-ins, she ill-advisedly styles herself. It's a misnomer. She was a mixed-race woman, and as some of you know, I've published a lot about mixed-race identities and the various ways that Webb used that. But that's particularly important in terms of solo performers who perform as characters, men and women, people of different races. And that was part of what Webb chose to do. And her first performances, besides poetry and Shakespeare, she performed as Irish, French, and Southern African American characters. But something happened in 1853. So first, this is from Douglass's first account of her, talking about her fine voice, her easy and graceful manner, For Black women, the sense of the importance of their dignity and their respectability was so important in the ways that they were received. So you see that in all the Douglas reviews and other reviews of Webb. But by 1853, she met Harriet Beecher Stowe. And the novel, Uncle Tom's Cabin, as some of you may know, was more famous as a theatrical performance than as a novel. There were Tom shows all over the US and the UK. And in fact, at the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln said to Stowe, "You're the little woman who started this great big war," thinking about the way spectators responded to the enactment of that novel. But that novel was also minstrelized, and we can see today, and even then, the racist underpinnings in the novel. So by adapting it as a one-woman show for one person, and that person being a Black woman elocutionist, something very different happened there. And here you see advertisements of her readings in the place of anti-slavery lectures. So the idea that the experience of enslavement would be understood differently by spectators seeing this elocutionary performance. And the spectators were vast and famous. Here you have a quote from Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's journal, his diary, where he went to see her, the Mrs. is Mrs. Webb. It turns out she wasn't the daughter of Espartero, because I've spoken to his biographer, but certainly a Spaniard and a self-liberated former enslaved mother. That's Webb's parentage. But as Longfellow said, it was a striking scene, a Cleopatra with a white wreath in her dark hair, her sweet musical voice, reading to a great, unimpassioned, immovable Boston audience. However, the other reviews say that she certainly moved that audience. And Stowe was so impressed with what Webb did, because remember, if you've ever read that novel, there are 100 characters. In the adaptation, Stowe takes it down to 27 different characters and has, in this one-woman performance, Webb doing all of the characters, men and women, Black and white. What you see there is a letter that Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote to part of the British nobility, advertising the Webbs and mentioning that they were coming to England. So first she had been very successful performing in the US, and then they were going to England, and Webb was introducing her in advance to some of the people who, particularly women, who had helped her. And so that sense that Stowe identifies Webb as being endowed with extraordinary genius for education, and announcing further on in the letter that you saw there that even pro-slavery lyceums have broken through their prejudices through seeing the role of spectatorship here is really important. And Stowe mentions, "I dramatized this expressly for her." So I want you to just imagine how different it is to hear a text through the voice and body of a Black woman. And, you know, theaters were very segregated, as you'll hear in the second part of this, at that time. So this was remarkable for mixed audiences to see. When she got to England, she performed, and I've been tracing, and I'll be back in England in just a month to look at more of the accounts of Webb in Britain. But the most famous is this dramatic reading. There are no photographs that I found of her, but this illustration was published in the Illustrated London News of this famous reading that she did in the home of the Duchess of Sutherland, who was an abolitionist. And the Illustrated London News described how, with very little gesticulation, remember, these aren't whole theatrical performances. It's one person, no costumes, no background. In their voice and body, this is the role of the elocutionist, they have to create all of these characters. And that's what we see there with Webb. So it was highly received. all through the UK. I'm looking at more anti-slavery societies' notices of when Webb came there and what the audience, how the audiences responded. As some of you know, probably, the Brits had abolished enslavement in 1807. This is 1856, right? Even the 1830s, they abolished enslavement officially, not to say that people weren't still subject to horrendous treatment, but even in their colonies. So decades later, seeing a Black woman doing all of these performances really resonated with audiences and helped the British take the support of the North in the Civil War. This is obviously a decade before the Civil War, but if you have questions, I'll tell you more about what happened with Webb after that. But given the time, I just want to mention to you that she performed to great success there, and so many people, including Charles Sumner, the senator, who was attacked for his strong anti-slavery work, came to see her. He was in England at the time. So unfortunately, she had a short life. She performed for 18 months in Britain and then got tuberculosis. She and her husband ended up leaving, moving to Jamaica, where she died. So she died very young. I'll tell you more about her if we have time afterward. But in the short time that I have, I want to introduce you to the second elocutionist, who I'm talking about here. So right after Webb died, we have the birth of Henrietta Vinton Davis. So Davis was a free woman, and she was working, Frederick Douglass comes through all of my work, she was working in Washington, D.C., and she worked with Frederick Douglass, who was so impressed with her that he helped encourage her to perform. So the sense of theatricality and performativity, not being just entertainment, but being a tool of activism, is what I want you to recognize in this work, and that's the focus of the course I'm developing as well. So here's a quote from Douglass later on, but he introduced her at a very first performance. And Vinton Davis, that was in 1883, that first performance where she made her debut, and Douglass described her as one of the best dramatic readers in the country, the best colored, that was the term used at the time, reader that ever came before the American people, and that she instantly commanded attention and sympathy. When her deep, fine voice was heard, her audience at once give themselves up to the pleasure of hearing her. Now, there were elocutionists who were giving training, they were teachers, and one of the things that we know about Vinton Davis is that she was a performer. And she did in her initial performances, again, scenes from Shakespeare, poetry, but she also very much gravitated toward the work of Black writers like Paul Dunbar. And then she herself became one of the co-writers of a play about the Haitian Revolution, Dessalines, where she not only helped write the play, but she also performed in the play. So she was, during the time she was performing, one of the first Black people who did Shakespearean performances and all of these other critical literary techniques. One of the things I want you to think about when we talk about reaction to Black women as public speakers and performers is the sense of what they were operating against in terms of spectators who didn't know what they were coming to see and then were just blown away by this incredible work, this elocutionary work. And here's just a clipping. Again, when she's performing, and there are reviews all over the country. And here's one of the plays she was in. And again, as a solo performer, she played male and female characters. She highlighted issues about enslavement And following Fabián, I always use the term an enslaved person, not a slave, because the person who is enslaved has just that part of their experience, right? But she performs a lot about the Haitian Revolution. And in her performances, she became very politically active. And so by the 1890s, she left the stage and embraced a more radical Black political philosophy. And in 1912, she traveled mostly to the West Indies, Panama, and Costa Rica. And by the time she returned, she had become involved with Marcus Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association, which she joined in 1917. She was the woman who was the woman behind the UNIA. So if you know about that political movement, you can picture Marcus Garvey, but not the incredible success and popularity of this woman who people saw first as a performer, an incredibly talented and charismatic performer who then chose to turn all of that attention to activism as an international organizer, particularly for transnational Black activism. And she was really an African freedom fighter. And just in my closing, I want to show you some of the images. Here she is in the middle. You recognize Marcus Garvey. On the other side is Amy Garvey, and she was a powerful spokesperson for UNIA. She had been compared to other activists at the time. And in closing, I just want to show you one of the many Black newspapers. There were Black newspapers all over the US. One of the Black newspapers that accounted for hearing her and the impact Black elocutionary performers had, and here you can see this, but the poem that Crumble Lambert posted, I went to hear a lady Saturday night, a lady who was foremost in the fight. I sat enraptured as I heard her speak, condemn the mighty and defend the weak. Tell how we've suffered on this alien land ruled by the white man with an iron hand. The power of elocutionary performances have not been recognized. It slips in between theatrical history and public address and public speaking, but this was the tool that Black women used when they didn't have access to other kinds of political venues or theatrical venues. So I am inviting you to celebrate this kind of achievement with me, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really wonderful. When I was listening to your presentation, I couldn't help but think about how in sort of fine art renditions of Uncle Tom's Cabin, a frequent sort of visual device that was used was to depict enslaved people with very light skin. Mm-hmm. And that was sort of done to make viewers sort of more empathetic towards those characters. Right. And I couldn't help but draw a parallel between sort of that and Webb's identity as a mixed race woman. I'm wondering if you found anything or if you have any thoughts about how her mixed race might have contributed to how she was perceived or how maybe audiences thought about her and the character she depicted.
That's a great question. Thank you. First of all, I'm still trying to trace more of her parentage. In the few biographical mentions, they talk about how she was, not just that her father was Spanish, but that she was educated in a convent, and some say a convent in Cuba. I haven't been able to identify that for sure. When Stowe rewrote The Christian Slave for her, she focused on, there were Spanish songs inserted, so the mixed race heritage and acknowledging her Spanish background was definitely part of that. But I think the first part of your good question helps me think about the fact that of the many other performances of Uncle Tom's Cabin, they were rabidly racist. Many of them were white actors in blackface. Some of them, as you mentioned, were mixed race appearing people. But there was so much minstrelsy, you know, the horrors of blackface minstrelsy, in terms of adaptations of that novel that many people speculate that's part of what prompted Stowe to rewrite it and to have people only hear it through a black woman. Webb very much identified as a black woman. She's mixed race, but very much as a black woman. And so from the very first advertisements as the Black Siddons, even before she met Stowe, she identifies in that way. So I think it's this complicated part of mixed race identity. And of course, at a time when there's still enslavement in the United States, someone who is not part of a binary, but can embody all aspects, and all gendered aspects as well, really challenges the stereotypes of racism and segregation. So thanks for that question. Anything else?
So Lisa, this is really exciting because to hear about elocutionists during the 1800s sounds like it's been around for a while, but it's a hidden trove of information that you've uncovered. Yeah. So I want to applaud you for that. I don't have a question. I just think it's really exciting. Now you've opened my mind to think about other places to go to find information on this stuff.
Thank you so much. Yeah, you know, the elocutionists were ways that, and they were mostly women, there were some male elocutionists, but they studied presentation and performance. And as you guys know, or most of you know, I'm in the Department of Writing Studies and Rhetoric, so the use of rhetoric, right, was part of it. But the fact that black women particularly chose this was a way the issues of respectability were automatically reinforced, because you think about all the comments of Webb's gracefulness, and Vinton Davis as well, the respectability of these performers. This is a time when there's a great anti-theatrical prejudice even against white women who are theatrical performers. They're being equated with prostitutes, right? So here is somebody not in costume, taking the best literature, not just Uncle Tom's Cabin or Hiawatha, and also think about Webb as Hiawatha, right? So she takes on the voice of other people of color as well in performance. But the idea of doing that and getting an audience, because there are lyceums and public speaking events all over the country. Remember, there's no recorded sound, there's no television. This is the entertainment of the time, and part of what I'm trying to tease out is how much this vastly under-researched form of entertainment that black women embraced was also a tool of activism. So thank you so much for that. Yeah, more.
Yeah, if we could just hold that till the end.
Okay, Mario, we can talk after if we don't have time. Oh. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you all for this.
Hello, everyone. Still here. So the title of my presentation is Colors That Move, Motivate, and Mobilize, LGBTQ Storytelling from the Diaspora and its broader impact. And just a brief project summary. The question that I am invested in this particular project is that we all know films to be a very powerful emotional force. The rhetorical question, which I want to put to test, is can they move beyond feeling to inspire real behavioral change and action? And we know that all films don't make us want to do that. I've sat through a lot of Jason Bourne movies, and all I wanted to do was just to find the finest scoop of ice cream after that. So there's a particular intentionality in certain types of film which seeks to create or hopes to create change amongst people. And I'm, as somebody who has invested himself in that particular form of filmmaking or documentary filmmaking, I wanted to extend the reach of the film beyond just the emotional affect to see what it can achieve with the use of certain tools. And the way I wanted to explore this is that I'm presenting the actual culmination of my provost grant is a workshop that I plan to do on the 15th of April during Common Hour. We're still figuring out the venue and other details in conjunction with the Center for Race, Culture and Social Justice, which will fully kind of test out this model that I want to try out. So much as I would like to say that I know what to expect, this is a very experimental process, something that has been tried out in other disciplines. And in fact, Lisa and I were talking on our train trip this morning, and we discovered, that in theater, this form of interaction with the audiences has been part of the movement, from something called the theater of the oppressed. So we are looking, perhaps this could be the birth of a new project. So I always vouch for those train journeys. So the structure of these workshops uses short documentary, episodes that map the family acceptance journeys of a South Asian gay individual. They're paired with prompts that are designed to elicit responses and interactions amongst the audiences, but also interaction with the larger body of people gathered there. And the two concepts that I'm looking for from humanities research are the idea of narrative empathy, which we all know to be this idea of stepping into somebody else's shoes, or process of storytelling that allows us to take on feelings and experiences while recognizing our own presence as separate from the person on the screen. And the extension that I seek to make in this idea that is embedded in every literary or filmic or theatrical storytelling is the concept that I borrowed from Terry Gibbons' writing on racial justice, and which she offers this process of radical empathy, which moves the needle beyond emotional affect to actionable empathy. So even though her work is in the realm of structural racism, I find it useful because she relies on storytelling as a big part of her work. So just a little bit about myself. So I approach documentary filmmaking from a social lens, and I think of it as a co-creation. I center advocacy in my work, see the purpose of film as creating impactful stories that can be used by communities that are working towards social change. By aligning myself with community-based organizations or community groups and letting them co-create the agenda while I collaborate with them on the storytelling part, I join the question of objectivity to my process. And the key ingredients to such work are the following: shared authorship, the evolution of trust, the building on a foundation of trust, sourcing knowledge and information to the extent feasible from the community themselves, transparent and consultative stages of filmmaking, choosing forms or style that reflects context or text that come from within the communities, iterative improvements to the finished work that are done in consultation with the organizations themselves, and then finally strategizing the distribution of the work to enable the highest impact. The project for which I received the Provost Grant is built around a documentary film series titled Body Home World, South Asian LGBTQ Journeys, that I began working on in the year 2015. Through a series of short episodes, these documentaries trace the respective journeys of South Asian LGBTQ individuals and their family members as they overcome grief, misgivings, and biases to celebrate one another. You could say that this project is an example of my radical empathy towards my people, the South Asian, as a heterosexual South Asian male towards my community. And it's an effort to expand the community's sphere to include sexual and gender diversity. And I'll talk more about the specifics of this project as I go on in my presentation. For Body Home World, I determined that releasing the film through a free online portal would allow individuals and community organizations the access, the dissemination, and then the platform for building their own dialogue. Early distribution, which happened from 2020 onwards, took place through Zoom launches, through community and campus screenings. I gathered a lot of feedback, as well as web analytics, because it was presented as an interactive web documentary. So I found out who was accessing them, from where, for how long people were watching. I'm telling you, anything online, if you look at the analytics, is dismaying. Sometimes it's as long as 11 seconds. So this phase of the deployment was very educational because it became clear that the portal could benefit from the addition of tools to help contextualize, frame, and facilitate how these films could be used by the audiences who it was intended for. So this proposed workshop comes out of this long process of learning. So we understand quite well at this point that our mirror neurons in the human body, in the human brain, we tap into them when we are immersed in the stories about others. This allows for this amazing cortisol, oxytocin, dopamine dance, also known as empathy. The ability to feel with some intensity what a stranger might be going through without losing sense of one's own presence. Suzanne Keene offers a framework for how we might understand and use narrative empathy, which she defines as, quote, sharing of feeling and perspective taking induced by reading, viewing, hearing, or imagining narratives of another's situation and condition, unquote. Keene suggests that narrative empathy can be used in strategic contexts. So this is where the act of filmmaking as a strategic intervention, as a strategic form of storytelling, mirrors hers. Keene suggests that narrative empathy can be used in strategic contexts to deepen one's connection with the story's subjects. So we're talking about extending the realm of emotional affect that films present. This in turn can trigger transformative engagement with future encounters. And those words are key. So what we take from one emotional affect experience, we bring to the next encounter. Keene's work is confirmed by neuroscience research, such as the studies done by Dr. Paul Zak, which demonstrate that empathic responses result in changed behavior due to altered brain chemistry. So this is profound. Might seem commonplace because we experience this, but it has lasting impact. Keene makes a distinction between three kinds of groups that might display a range of empathic responses based on their position vis-a-vis the story's subject. The first, which she refers to as bounded strategic empathy, occurs in groups, the people that are most impacted by the story. So in my case, for instance, if it's an LGBTQ community within the South Asian community, and if I organize a screening in a queer space or in an LGBTQ advocacy organization, their response would be the bounded strategic empathy, as somebody who experiences this issue firsthand. She goes on to explain that the other groups that might experience something that's a little bit removed from this experience is ambassadorial strategic empathy. So these are target groups whose empathy, so people like journalists, influencers, opinion leaders, whose empathy might lead to the amplification and the benefit of the other in-group, people that belong to the in-group. These are chosen others, she says, with the aim of cultivating their empathy for the in-group. We may think of these categories, and I choose these groups when I set up screening, so I might identify on a campus who to invite for a screening. I might sometimes align with a parent advocacy organization. So these are choices that I make as a filmmaker in terms of deciding where the impact is best felt. And then finally, she mentions the third group as the broadcast strategic empathy, which calls upon every reader who walks the land to feel with the members of the group by emphasizing common vulnerabilities and hopes through universalizing representations. So this is the hope of making sure that things that are of concern to an in-group are broadly felt by the largest possible audiences that are out there. And we know for a fact that with regard to LGBTQ rights, over 3 decades in the United States, we saw sociologists tracking public opinion change from what used to be something in the teens, 12 to 14% to 60%, 68% over the course of 3 decades. So with the understanding that larger groups can take the cue or the lead from advocacy efforts that originate from other places is of value here. When I began working on the doc series, it was clear that I was addressing, as a parent, I was addressing parents of queer South Asians. And I saw a deep connection between the degree to which the broader South Asian population engaged with these questions and the extent to which the gender and sexual minorities felt normalized and accepted. I chose inspiring stories of parents who marched in pride parades alongside their queer child or their trans daughter. They didn't bury them in silence, but above all, they were willing to speak about the process that brought them to a place of love and compassion. This group may be considered close to the in-group, which in my case were LGBTQ individuals of South Asian descent, but it also shared traits with Keene's ambassadorial strategic empathy group. These were chosen others with the aim of cultivating the empathy for the in-group. It is through their stories that I could reach other parents, whether South Asian or not, those who thought that were unaffected by this issue, yet held a powerful place as a dominant mainstream community voice. These broadcast empathy group people could be fellow students, HR officials, colleagues, landlords, neighbors who would form the ecosystem in which we live. I registered that my target audience was arrayed along this continuum in relationship to and views on sexual and gender minorities. And while my films could have impact through telling inspiring stories, I needed that bridge to help walk the larger audiences to do more, whatever that means. So I turned to Terry Gibbons's work, which she began her life training as a political scientist, focusing on far-right movements in Europe. And it was only after COVID and George Floyd that she turned her lens to thinking about structural racism. Connecting her personal narrative of familial loss and the structural racism and types of health inequities. In fact, when I was researching, I found that her book in our library, it's actually in the health sciences section. In the types of health inequities she encountered, she saw the way forward as one that used empathic connection to reach disaffected publics. And she seeks inspiration from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission work by Mandela in post-apartheid South Africa, as well as the healing that Germany did post-World War II. According to Gibbons, radical empathy means a willingness to be vulnerable, becoming grounded in who you are, opening yourself to the experiences of others, practicing empathy, taking action, and creating change and building trust. So using this framework, which she mentions with reference to people's learnings about social justice, the history of racism, which one does in their own time, my challenge was how to adapt this framework for a time-based medium such as film, where emotions are fleeting. What we feel is in the moment, the aura of the characters, the empathic connections we make are all in bounded within a time frame. So how do we capture that moment and yet start to move audiences in this way that Terry Gibbons suggests? So I lean on the structure of my documentary shorts. So just a few words about how the films are structured. Unlike the standard documentary where you watch it from start to finish, my documentary shorts were episodically structured. So I start with an episode where you might hear the parent of somebody who's queer describe who they are, where they come from, what their first knowledge was about their child. And that centers their story as we are watching them. Then the next episode could be their child experiencing the same time frame from their point of view. So it's multivocal storytelling, but not in a standard documentary form where you cut from one person to another, where you kind of dissolve the presence of each in the hope of using the time effectively. So interestingly, at the time that I was creating this work, I hadn't thought about workshopping with them. But now that I look back and I started to look for these moments within the film that would provide the moments of reflection, they started to seem brilliant in retrospect, that I had done something that I could mine for use within workshop contexts. So the short episodic structure that is used in facilitation, on the interactive web platform on which the stories are placed, the user has the ability to weave through them. They might start with a parent story, or they might switch to their child's story, or they might watch one in a linear way, one after another. So there are 5 episodes in total for each family's journey, 2 done from each perspective, and the 5th one that is a unifying or a convergent story, which is typically the celebratory or the one that reconciles differences and allows the families to move forward as one. So screening the films to a live audiences, aside from how they were watching it on the online platform, sparked really profound conversations, which seemed to dissipate when we left the space. So that important question, I felt moved by the story, now what, lingered on. So the structure that I was describing earlier on, which is LGBTQ journeys on one side, family journeys on the other side. We start with, for instance, Parag Mehta is one of the characters in the story. We watch his story of coming of age, figuring out what to do with that information, how to interact with people around him, how to find allyship, how to come to the family. So body is the first stage of self-discovery. Home is when you communicate within your family, and world is when the family and the home and the world, they all come together to speak their truth and live in the publics. So on April 15th, I plan to use the documentary shorts in this experimental workshop that I was referring to, where moments of inflection within the story, where, for instance, and I'll play a piece for you folks to see, you are left at the end of episode 1, you're left with the question, this person decided to reveal to his family on the day of his graduation from college that he was gay. And the episode ends over there. So the audiences are left with these anticipations of what might happen. And that provides a moment for reflection. What are some of the things that are arising in your mind? Your knowledge of South Asian communities or your knowledge of South Asian families, how does that color the way that you're watching the film? And as we go through the episodes, the arc of the individual then starts to become the arc of the audiences as well. So they would start to move through these interventions, they start to move their own needle from distancing, questions, and doubt to acceptance along with the characters themselves. My hypothesis is that while the cultural terrain of these stories is not shared by the broader population or the broader participants, their ability to journey in the shoes of the other can be even more profound, given this remove. So the structure of the workshop utilizes built-in episodic breaks to propose questions that are designed to provoke reflection and response to the stories at various points. Their design is intended to anticipate honest sharing, vulnerability, and registerings of personal bias without labeling these as such. Using the narrative arc of the characters, the workshop builds on the strength of transformative action, empathic role-taking, and inspirational affect. Towards the end, and this is where Terry Gibbons' framework comes into play, the workshop pivots to actionable empathy, asking each participant how they envision their lives leaving the setting of the workshop, and whether they can articulate publicly or in private a way for them to act in small, medium, or large ways within the communities that they live and work in. These may range from committing to having a long overdue conversation with somebody, to speaking up the next time you hear an adverse comment or a joke being made, to a unique skill set they may have to offer in the space of queer advocacy, to supporting an organization with their time, money, or skill. So I'm hoping that the facilitation process that accompanies the screening of these films will test out some of these ideas that I'm using from literary frameworks or political science frameworks, but transferring them to a time-based medium such as documentary, which is the realm that I work in. So these are some of the images of 4 families that I documented in the diaspora portion of the film, which I started working on in 2016 through 2021. And then the next images are from India. So I traveled to India from 2022 to 2024. I spent about 6 months filming in 4 different smaller towns and cities with the families over there. And altogether, this omnibus project will have 8 short documentaries, which I hope to offer online, but now with the addition of potentially workshop tools or facilitation tools that can be used by individuals and organizations, whatever type of work that they're doing. So I'm just going to skip past, since I've covered these, and I'll maybe play one of the clips that I am planning on using in the workshop.
When I came out to my parents, I was really scared. I did not want to tell them. But when I met Parag, he made a good point. He said that, well, Vaibhav, remember that, you owe so much to your parents. You love them so much. You owe this to them that even if you don't tell it to anybody else, you need to tell them that who you are. I was so scared to tell my parents because I thought my parents are gonna disown me. Spoke to friends, said this could be my final farewell. Things could go crazy. So when I came out to my mother and my father, they were shocked. And I still remember something that my mother said that, I'm really upset and I feel like I've done something wrong.
So in the context of the workshop, this potentially is a moment where I pause and I take the temperature of the audiences, and I might have a facilitation prompt that asks them to figure out what the character might be feeling. And then I also ask them to talk about what they might be feeling. So this process of constantly being in the story, but also being who they are, allows for this exchange that we are actively doing, but it allows them to be articulated more clearly within the context of a workshop. So this facilitation, I'm hoping that it allows people to stay in these moments of inflection in the documentary. We know that these things are resolved because the documentaries do have families that are very supportive. But in the process of learning the story, we don't quite know the arc. And so these moments kind of allow us that pause, and these are built in because this is literally the ending of the first episode of Vaibhav Jain's story. And then we learn about what happens in the next episode. And so the ball kind of keeps traveling, but we stop and take a moment to sort of figure out how we are feeling in these particular moments, despite the not having reached the fullness of the story. And I'll play one more. Maybe I'll stop here because we're sort of running close to the end, and leave some time for questions. So look for the announcement with the details of the workshop soon on its way.
Thank you. Questions?
I was just curious if you have planned or had already done any outreach to family therapists and counseling folks who might be able to help you facilitate those conversations and provide tools.
The people that I have been working with are already part of organizations. So one big organization that I work with is called Daisy Rainbow Parents and Allies, based out of New Jersey, which was started by an acquaintance who has a trans child. And when she was looking for spaces in which she could share her experience, she, as a person of color, couldn't find any. She attended PFLAG meetings and ended up starting her own organization. So within the fold of her organization, she has reached out to people such as family therapists, because that's a big space where young people, especially when they're teenagers and college-going age, when they start to experience these changes in their bodies, experience of sexuality. So I've spoken to those groups, but not specifically to family therapists per se. But we've been talking earlier on about the use of this type of format in drama therapy, for instance. And while therapeutic, while the realm of therapy is a one-on-one interaction between the therapist and the what is we call analysand, the realm of narrative therapy, which is what we are doing, for the lack of a better word, is a slightly different order of magnitude, because we are trying to contain opinions in the room that might be diverse, that might be far-ranging, and allowing them all to exist, but also to be articulated in that space. So while there's learning from the therapeutic spaces, I'm pretty sure that the facilitation within small groups will be a slightly different order of, will be a nuance that I'm hoping to learn from.
This was amazing. Really, bravo. I had a question. How long is each episode? And then how long is the workshop and the whole experience?
Great question. So the totality of 5 episodes, it's about close to 30 minutes. And the entire workshop will be the duration of a common hour. Yeah.
And we can talk about hosting this at the museum if you're interested.
Okay. Call me. Yes.
I guess now we're in the open forum, but I'll ask one question to Ashish, and then we'll open up for any other questions. So I really like the idea of the narrative versus the radical empathy, and your use of workshops. But how do you envision measuring like the action taken after the workshop?
That's a tough one, because some of the planned actionable empathy things that I propose to offer to people is also the making of a commitment, finding like a AA style sponsor who can help you with keep that commitment. But those are harder to follow up. I'm relying more on the nature of conversations that come up. So the structure of the workshop will be small groups seated around tables that discuss the prompts or write the prompts internally, in other words, note them down. And then at the end, they discuss them within the groups, and then a rapporteur from each table summarizes those responses. I plan to record those responses to see what was elicited in terms of people's sense of bias or sense of internal reflection, or their fears about the characters, what was going to happen, and how they resolved them in the course of watching the film. What is harder is the measuring of what happens when people leave. I'm thinking about it, but maybe there is a way that people can come back to the portal and register something that they might have done, or maybe journal about it, and that becomes part of an ongoing way of collecting, anecdotal comments from folks. But in terms of an academic measurement, I haven't quite, but I'm willing to take ideas.